Welcome to this week's episode of Insights. During today's show, we're going to cover two topics. The first one is going to be the economic impact of the great migration into Armenia over the last month. And the second one is going to be Aliyev's illegal invasion of the Askeran region of Artsakh last week. Let's move on and start with the economic impact of the great migration. What we know, and this is sort of a moving these numbers are always moving and changing on a daily basis, is that somewhere close to 60 to 70,000 people have moved to Armenia, mostly from Russia, but partially from Ukraine and Belarus. In technical terms, and what this means, and all of these numbers are dated, and we need to be clear about that because we're not going to announce them until they come out of official sources. 143 foreign firms have registered in Armenia since the beginning of the war. 113 of them are from Russia, 14 of them from Belarus, 10 from Ukraine, 4 from Moldova, and 2 from Kazakhstan. The reason they are essentially coming here is since the Russian economic system is cut off from the banking system of the West, the businesses move here so they can actually directly deal with their clients and actually be paid for their work. These numbers can be somewhat misleading. First of all, as I said, these are dated, so these numbers have probably grown dramatically since then. 143 firms does not mean 143 IBMs. This is anything from a 5-person firm that's moved here to companies that have more than 500 employees. So it's a big mix of people. But in fact, most of the people who have moved here from Russia and Ukraine are actually not working for any company. They're mostly independent contractors, people who work directly, usually in IT with their clients in the West, and they essentially need a country where they can actually stay in that's relatively inexpensive, culturally friendly, and has a banking system that can work with Western banks. Let's go over some of the anecdotal things we've heard or seen. We know of countless cases, probably around 10, in which Russian firms have taken over entire floors of hotels, different hotels in Yerevan. And the way they operate is that essentially people sleep in the hotel rooms, the doors open in the morning, and they operate as an office throughout the day. And these kinds of incidents and places are actually constantly growing because there's more and more firms coming. Obviously, all of these people eventually will have to move into regular housing and normal office spaces, which we actually have a great shortage of in this country. One thing that is quite noticeable is that the look of Yerevan itself has changed dramatically. It's fair to say that in central Yerevan, probably at this point, 1 out of every 3 people is a foreigner, which is something that we're not used to, and it's quite different. The clear implication here is that these people on an economic front have had a great positive economic impact. They've actually raised buying power. It's hard to get reservations in restaurants. That's great. They use a lot of resources, services, and they're actually, again, bringing a lot of buying power to the economy. But as with anything, it's not all positive. We have actually seen some very negative things, especially on the housing front, in which people who have been long-time tenants are being asked to leave to be replaced by foreigners that can pay rent at a much higher rate. In fact, the rents here sometimes approach Western numbers now, somewhere between $1,500 to $2,000, depending on what you're renting. And one of the things that we've learned is, since we've never had this issue, that there's actually almost no rental protections in Armenian law. Everything is essentially month to month, and you can essentially ask people to leave, and no one has ever written anything about this because it's never been an issue. But this is something that needs to be addressed. So what we get out of this is the positive impact, and we can mitigate the negative impact of this migration. The one ministry that I think deserves a lot of credit, we normally on this show are very critical of all Armenian government institutions, but I think our economics minister, Mr. Kiropian, is actually doing a fantastic job and actually working with his team to actually take, especially the larger firms that are coming here one by one, and actually working them through the bureaucracy so they can make this move as simple, as palatable as possible. Let's move on to the second topic of this week, which is the situation in Artsakh. We'll first start with the gas situation. 3 days ago, the Aliyev regime actually turned on the gas to Artsakh under great international pressure. Again, they deserve no credit for this because they had no right to cut it off in the first place. Let's move on to what happened over this weekend, which happened in the Askaran region of Artsakh, in an area called Parukh village and the surrounding hills. The Aliyev regime has been trying to cause all of these tensions, trying to intimidate people, and find places where they can essentially find ways to intimidate local people into leaving or create tensions unnecessarily. While these tensions were sort of coming to a head over the weekend, both sides were at Parukh village, the Armenian side to defend it, and the other side to try to overrun it. The Russian peacekeepers sort of reached an understanding in which both sides had to essentially demilitarize and withdraw to their sides, which is something the Armenian side did foolishly. And this was followed by the Azeri side that did not pull back and actually overran Parukh village and the hills surrounding it. And they actually tried to take over the village of Khramort, which they failed because of the strong response of local volunteers and the Artsakh Defense Forces. This is an issue that's been festering since that day. Now, what was interesting about this is that the response from the international community for the first time actually changed. Unlike anything in the past since the November 9th agreement, where everybody says both sides, this nonsense about not differentiating between, you know, the genocidal aggressor and the other side that's trying to defend its human rights. In this case, both the Russians, the French, and the Americans, which are three of the primary countries in the OSCE Minsk group, clearly called out who the aggressor was and actually asked the Azeri side to withdraw. This followed up, and it's actually still going on, between a war of words between the Russia and the Aliyev regime. In fact, they've been banning each other's websites. The language against each other has been very harsh, which is rather odd for two countries which signed a strategic alliance agreement less than 5 weeks ago. This was followed up on a Sunday night by an announcement by the Russian peacekeeping forces in Artsakh that the Aliyev forces had withdrawn from Parukh village and that the village is under the control of Russian peacekeepers, which they released videos of, drone videos of, which is actually true. It is true that the Aliyev's forces did withdraw. However, they did not withdraw from one of the hills immediately overlooking this village in this area called Karagluch. So there's less to this announcement than meets the eye, because until they are withdrawn from the entirety of the areas that they have illegally invaded, no one is going to go back to live in that village, because no one's going to live while Aliyev's gunmen have a chance to shoot you whenever you come out of your house. So this is hopefully a work in progress, which will eventually lead to the entire withdrawal of Aliyev's forces from these regions. What are we to make of this aggression and the Russian response to it? There are, in fact, two distinct possibilities about what led to the events of this weekend. The first one, which is that this might have been green-lighted by the Russians themselves in some kind of a deal and understanding. And what has raised the suspicion is that 2 days before these events, there was actually a high-level military meeting between the Azeri and the Russian sides. The more likely scenario, however, is not the first one, it's the second one, which is that given the ongoing crisis in Ukraine and the distraction of the Russian forces there, Aliyev is trying to change the facts on the ground to see how much he can push in changing the status quo, the ceasefire status quo, from November 9th. The other thing that's very clear here, it is almost inconceivable for this thing not to have been planned, coordinated, or actually probably even prompted by Aliyev's good ally and friend, Mr. Erdogan, is because it is inconceivable for Aliyev to be challenging or shooting over Russian forces, shooting over them, if they did not have the clear blessings or the backup of the Turkish regime, which also has its own backdrop, because the Turks can easily sell this in Brussels and in other places as a way to distract Russian forces and other things. I'm not sure how successful that'll be, but that's a compelling line that they can be pushing. This is truly a watershed moment in the post-November 9th, 2020 period. There's a couple of key variables here. And the first one is, if Aliyev's forces are not forced to withdraw exactly to where they were on November 9th, which is the original positions of everyone post the November 9th agreement, we will see a repeat of this once a week, once every couple of weeks, once every couple of months, continually. There will be no end to it unless they're forced to withdraw to where they should be legally. Secondly, it's very clear that Aliyev's intentions, the strategic intention, is to create as many situations in which people in Artsakh are actually forced to live within shooting range of his gunmen. That is a priority, because what they're trying to accomplish, what he's trying to accomplish, is ethnic cleansing without the necessary ugliness that comes with that. You don't want to go in and kill people. You want them to leave because they're intimidated and they're constantly being shot at and cannot live in a normal fashion. As far as the Russians go, if they do not force Aliyev's forces to withdraw to their November 9th agreement and withdraw essentially from all areas that are of their own security control, and that their army is actually being pushed around by a state and its armed forces, which are, let's be honest, about 2 steps above ISIS. It's one of two things. They're either complicit in this aggression, or at this point they've essentially become a helpless giant and not a nuclear power that anybody fears. Another interesting development while all of this was going on was a very important announcement that was made by the IRGC, which is the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, on its Twitter account, of all places, over the weekend. This was unprompted as far as we know. And what it says, it seems like it's drawing very strategic, significant red lines, and which said that the IRGC will not stand for any redrawing of any borders in this region. It's not hard to figure out who this is directed at or what region this is directed at, which is Sunni. Now, what is interesting here is the IRGC has a long relationship with the Russian state. In fact, the 2014 Iranian and Russian program to save Assad actually was prompted by an IRGC meeting in Moscow between the head of the IRGC, Qasem Soleimani, and the Russian president, in which Russian air power was going to be mixed with Iranian proxies and ground forces to save the Assad regime, which actually ended up being successful. But at the same time, there are also rivals in Syria in trying to influence that regime. However, given the exclusive nature of the Russia as being the only power that can actually have military forces in Armenia, it is highly unlikely that this announcement was made without coordination with the Russian side or their approval. So obviously someone's trying to send someone a message for whatever purpose. In conclusion, regardless of what any of these outside powers do for their own purposes, with each other, against each other, frankly, it doesn't matter. What it is clear, what the events of the last few days have made very clear, that it is time for us to consider and reconsider our security systems, both in Armenia and Artsakh. We need to act prudently, yet strongly. The operative word here is to act, to enable the Artsakh forces to be able to act in defending the lives of Armenians living there. When it comes to such matters, it does not matter what others say. It only matters what we do. Thank you for joining me in this week's episode of Insights.
We are peaceful people. We are loving people. We love everybody who loves us. But we don't love anybody who doesn't love us. We're nonviolent with people who are nonviolent with us. But we are not nonviolent with anyone who is violent with us.